So what I want to talk with you today about is something called prebunking, and I'm just going to dive right in because this is something that I learned about a couple of years ago, right around election time, and I was looking at some Smithsonian articles, and this one was about disinformation. And you may have heard in the introduction that I'm the chair of the ICA Commission on Ethics and Cartography, and one of the things that has come to my attention and sort of stayed in the foreground of my attention is the ability to misuse maps. We've talked a lot in recent years about trust in maps and the authority of maps, and in my opinion, I think maps are still one of the main information outlets that has still credibility, and people still do trust maps. So what is it that we can do to retain that trust in maps? Can we try not to lose that trust? So I came across this article a couple years ago in Smithsonian Magazine. No, it was Scientific American, and it was about disinformation. And it was about how right now, disinformation, for some people, it's the coin of the realm. It's the thing that really is causing people to, pay attention to things like vaccine denial and climate denial, election denial. And this is coupled with a report that was put together that ranked the spread of misinformation as one of the greatest threats to humanity, coupled with the fact that people's beliefs aren't always aligned with facts. So for example, 20% of young Americans believe that the Holocaust is a myth, or 33% believe that the risks of COVID vaccines outweigh the benefits. And one of the things that I saw in this article was that the author was suggesting there is a solution which isn't to sue, harass, or censor misinformation propagators. On the contrary, misinformation researchers have identified novel ways to make people more resistant to being misled without risk of censorship or interfering with anyone's freedom of speech. And one of those techniques is known as inoculation, which involves boosting people's information discernment skills. And the key to inoculation is prebunking. And that's realizing that misleading or false information has markers that can help differentiate it from high quality information. So I started looking into this, and there was another article, and this was sort of an interview. And in that interview, the person who was being interviewed mentioned the book that they wrote called Foolproof. And in this book called Foolproof, they were talking about a psychological vaccine against misinformation. So the author wrote, or the person who was being interviewed said, "I was going through journals and found models from epidemiology and public health that are used to understand how information propagates across a system, and instead of a virus spreading, you have an information pathogen. Somebody shares something with you, and then you spread it to other people. And that led me to wonder, is it true that misinformation spreads like a virus? And if so, is it possible to inoculate people?" So they actually have written scientific articles on this. They've done scientific studies on this. I don't know if you know this, but there's a whole branch of scientific study now on misinformation, not unsurprisingly. And so the way to think about this inoculation is that a virus attacks by exploiting our cells' weak spots and hijacking some of their machinery. It's the same for the mind in some ways. There are certain cognitive biases that can be exploited by misinformation, and misinformation infects our memories and influences the decisions we make. So one example is illusory truth bias. That's the idea that just hearing something repeatedly, even if you know it's wrong, makes it seem more true. And these learned automatic associations then become part of how your brain works. So more research, a little bit more research, and then there was a bit of a discussion about debunking. Now, debunking is correcting misinformation after it's already been spread. But the problem is that the misinformation has already been established, and it can already be sort of ingrained in the brain. Fact checks are unlikely to reach everyone who's been exposed to that initial misinformation. Getting people to believe fact checking is challenging. Effective interventions are hard. Testing the effectiveness of interventions is hard. So debunking is not the answer, because correcting misinformation does not always nullify its effects, and that effect is called the continued influence effect. So instead, we can look to prebunking. Prebunking is dealing with it before it happens. It's preeminently building resistance against anticipated exposure to misinformation. And this is grounded in the inoculation theory, which follows that medical immunization idea. And psychological inoculation treatments have two core components. One is forewarning, that induces a perceived threat of an impending attack on one's attitudes, and exposure to a weakened or microdose of misinformation that contains a preemptive refutation or prebunk of the anticipated misleading arguments or persuasion techniques. Okay, so we're looking at possibility of using this for misinformation for maps. So let's think about it. Inoculation theory has been put forward as a way to reduce susceptibility to misinformation by informing people about how they might be misinformed. Its scalability was elusive, though, and they developed these 5 short videos that were designed to inoculate people against misinformation techniques. Not misinformation about a particular thing, but the techniques that are used to misinform. And they found that they improved people's recognition of the potential of misinformation. So that means that it's not going to be able to get in because they've already recognized this might not be true. And they also showed that the best way that they were able to do this was through social media, which is often the place where misinformation is also propagated. Okay, so what they found was that there was a very small number, in fact 5 to 6, number of techniques that were consistently used to propagate misinformation. So let me just give you an example of what one of those videos looked like.
Either you stop watching the lamestream media, or you want all puppies to die. Makes sense, right? No? Good, because it shouldn't. It's a common manipulation technique called a false dichotomy, or a false dilemma. It's designed to make you think you only got 2 choices to choose from, when in reality, there are more. As with our little dilemma at the beginning, there's no reason why you can't watch me.
I'm going to fast forward a little bit, and I'll show you the popular media they use.
Revenge of the Sith.
My allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy! If you're not with me, then you're my enemy.
Anakin's claim that Obi-Wan is either with him or is his enemy is a clear case of false dichotomy. Obi-Wan is trying to prevent Anakin from joining the dark side, which naturally involves being critical of Anakin's choices. But just because Obi-Wan disagrees with Anakin doesn't automatically make them enemies. Obi-Wan's reply is actually perfect.
Only a Sith deals in absolutes.
Okay, so I'm thinking this is not impossible for, for cartography.
The lamestream media,
so I then got to thinking about this video.
This is our premium platinum coverage map, and this is Consumer Cellular's map. See the difference?
No, I don't see the difference. Do you?
Well, that one's purple. Exactly. That's our premium.
What does that mean?
I think it means it costs more. That's what makes it premium. That doesn't make sense, does it? No, but it is premium. I'd just go with Consumer Cellular.
Okay. And I think a lot of us have seen that, maybe commercial on TV. Then I started looking around and just things started popping out at me, really obvious things. So I read Consumer Reports and it said how to spot fake reviews. And so I said, okay, let's think about this for cartography. And are there a simple, small number of techniques that can be used to misinform with maps? So how are we going to find those? We could do a literature review, we could do a content analysis of maybe some selected maps that were used to misinform. We could look at some recent research, like for example, Tim's work on trust in maps, research at targeted at identifying those misinformation techniques, look at maybe surveying some people, and then I thought about ChatGPT. So I looked at Esri ChatGPT. We have an internal GPT, and I said, well, how can maps be used to propagate misinformation? And it came up with some ideas, and they weren't bad. So I did some shuffling, and I got to, looking at them a little closer, and I think it might be okay to start here. Selective data presentation, contextual misrepresentation, misleading visualizations, inaccurate representation, and lack of verification. So let's just look at these really quickly. Selective presentation, so cherry picking data, picking data that is, meant to support your proposition or your narrative or your conclusion, and then ignoring or just omitting contradictory information, or just leaving information out so the important context or data can just be left to the side. Then there's also outdated, fabricated, or inaccurate information. Contextual misrepresentation is the lack of or manipulation of context, so leave something out that helps to explain something that people are reading on a map. So for example, looking at crime rates in only certain neighborhoods without looking at larger areas or socioeconomic factors. And outdated information, using old maps or using old data that doesn't reflect current realities. Misleading visualizations, and I think this is where we could put I think we could come up with a lot of examples for this, but scale manipulation, the use of color schemes, ambiguous labels, data classification, symbology, and others, I'm sure. Inaccurate representations, so distorting things, like using projections to distort the story, or falsifying boundaries. Lack of verification, lack of credible sources, or echo chambers and confirmation bias, which means that unverified maps can be used within echo chambers where you're showing people what they already want, they already believe, and then it just sort of bounces around and keeps being reinforced. And so, like for the example of the last one, there are ways that you can counter that. Check the URL, Google the quote, or Google the map, see if it's been reproduced, reverse search the image, use checking tools. I'm not sure how many checking tools we have for maps, but checking tools like Snopes.com. And then I thought, well, this is a pretty good place to start. And what would, if we were to bring this to fruition, the next steps be? Maybe, double check the 5, manipulation techniques, come up with examples of how they've been used, come up with things that we can use to create videos like that, and then kick off a campaign. Because the idea is not to try and attack this when it's already a problem, but to get ahead of the problem so that we're already proactively trying to fight against the misuse of maps to propagate misinformation, which I think is a really lofty goal for our community. Thank you.
I'm going to stand over here. So we have a moment for, that was even worse. So we have a couple moments for questions. If there's any questions in the back, I will try to move to you without causing that noise. All right. Oh, yes, give me one moment.
Okay. Well, I don't have a question so much as want to thank Aileen here for actually starting out on what looks to be a very sound basis for beginning to address a real important problem like this. And thank you.
Join me in thanking Aileen one more time. Thank you.